Utterance must needs possess penetrating power, for if bereft of this quality, it would fail to exert influence. And this penetrating influence dependeth on the spirit being pure and the heart stainless. Likewise, it needeth moderation, without which the hearer will be unable to bear it. Rather, he would manifest opposition from the very outset. And moderation will be obtained by blending utterance with the tokens of divine wisdom, which are recorded in the sacred books and tablets. Thus, when the essence of one's utterance is endowed with these two requisites, it will prove highly effective and will be the prime factor in transforming the souls of men. This is the station of supreme victory and celestial dominion. Whoso attaineth thereto is invested with the power to teach the cause of God and to prevail over the hearts and minds of men. Baha'u'llah. In this cause, consultation is of vital importance, but spiritual conference and not the mere voicing of personal views is intended. Consultation must have for its object the investigation of truth. He who expresses an opinion should not voice it as correct and right, but set it forth as a contribution to the consensus of opinion. For the light of reality becomes apparent when two opinions coincide. A spark is produced when flint and steel come together. Man should weigh his opinions with the utmost serenity, calmness, and composure. Before expressing his own views, he should carefully consider the views already advanced by others. If he finds that a previously expressed opinion is more true and worthy, he should accept it immediately and not willfully hold to an opinion of his own. By this excellent method, he endeavors to arrive at unity and truth. Abdul Baha.
Thank you. So today we're really happy to have Ms. Fiona Young joining us, and her topic is Principles of Consultation and Discourse from a Baha'i Perspective. Fiona Young is a UK qualified lawyer and head of the employment team and head of human resources at the global law firm Ince Gibraltar office. After reading law at Liverpool University and completing her legal practice court at Chester College of Law in 1998, she worked in a city law firm in London for 5 years. In 2003, she moved to Gibraltar with her husband, where she continued to practice tribunal advocacy and litigation until 2015, when she trained as a mediator. In 2016, she completed a diploma in international commercial dispute resolution. Fiona's work focuses primarily on conflict resolution in the workplace, where she's passionate about helping management teams improve communication and solve internal conflicts amicably and in ways that encourage respect and dignity. When the government of Gibraltar introduced employment mediation for tribunal cases, Fiona became the first appointed tribunal mediator, serving that capacity for 4 years, facilitating amicable resolution of hundreds of matters that would previously have been litigated. Fiona has always been a strong advocate of promoting the need for greater diversity and representation of women at all levels of business, and is a panel member of the Ince Gender Diversity Group and an active member of Women in Enterprise Gibraltar, as well as providing mentoring to young women seeking advice and assistance with climbing the career ladder. Fiona currently lives in Portugal with her husband and teenage children, working remotely from the beautiful Algarve in the south. In her spare time, she enjoys hiking and engaging in the varied Baha'i activities, including assisting with junior youth and children's activities. And with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Young.
Hello, everybody. I'm really grateful to everyone for joining us on this Saturday, I'm assuming afternoon for most of us, but it's lovely to have a global audience. So yeah, when I was approached by Armin to participate in this really fantastic initiative, it took me all of about 3 seconds to think that if nobody else had spoken on consultation, then I'd really, really enjoy sharing my own personal experiences of bringing Baha'i concepts of consultation into my work life, but also having the opportunity to really explore some of the Baha'i writings. And we've already heard some of the views from the Baha'i faith read in those beautiful readings about utterance and about consultation. So I've just got, I'm hoping that I can fit everything in. And I do tend to speed up speaking, but I'm conscious that we're talking over Zoom, so I'll try and keep my pace at the right speed, but there's lots to fit in. I'm going to be trying to speak for between 30 and 40 minutes on the various sort of aspects of Baha'i consultation and my own personal experiences in my work life. So why did I choose consultation? So primarily, firstly, because it's such an important foundation stone of Baha'i activities and Baha'i discourse and interaction. And so my Baha'i background is I was born into a Baha'i family and raised by Baha'i parents. So my reality is that I have been engaged in consultation processes either at a family level through our family discussions and discourse, or observing as a child my parents interacting at Baha'i administrative level at various levels of Baha'i administration, which I will be talking about shortly. So if you're not familiar with Baha'i administration, I will try and give a 2-minute précis, but it's probably a talk unto itself. So as a child, I would sort of listen in and witness and observe, and therefore probably absorb this concept of Baha'i consultation. And then as I became a youth and a Baha'i adult in my own right, I would then also participate in the various administrative roles and functions that I may have been either asked or elected to. So that's my kind of Baha'i experience. And as I say, I think it's really, really important, the word I used of absorbing, because I think some of that just was a natural reality for me. And I think I'm lucky to have been able to be raised in this natural reality of a very inclusive discourse process. I then, enjoyed my academic life, let's say it that way. I enjoyed reading and I enjoyed writing. And so I chose law as my degree. And as most young law students tend to find themselves doing, you sort of fall into a vocational path. So although I had high aspirations to sort of work in human rights or women's rights, I ended up taking a job that I could take in the City of London. And so ended up working in the commercial field. And again, because of my love of reading, my love of writing, I decided to pursue litigation, as it was called then. Interestingly enough, now most law firms now call it dispute resolution. And there's a reason for that, which I can hopefully fit in and talk about later. And it's much nicer to call it dispute resolution than litigation. And so I spent the early years learning all about the litigation process, which I'm going to talk about later on, the traditional methods of litigation, representing my clients and really pushing my clients' view forward in quite an adversarial and occasionally, I dare say, aggressive manner with the team that I would have been working with. I then became a mother, and my kids are now 15 and 12, and something happened. Two things happened, my epiphany, which is why I have the picture of the light bulb. One was that the more my children sort of became able to verbalize and communicate and interact with one another, and I would say that most of their interactions were positive, when they reacted negatively and they were having their little disputes, they reminded me more and more of my clients, and my clients reminded me more and more of my kids. And I was sort of feeling that my clients were behaving in very childlike ways, which is not good when you're trying to represent someone and you really just feel like they need to grow up and make the apology they need to make. So and at the same time, through a variety of study processes that Baha'is have started to have been engaged in now for the past 25 years, which is the Ruhi process, in which we take systematic study, not just of our faith, but of the way in which our faith interacts with the outer community. I felt more and more conscious of the fact that I was separating out my work life by being this sort of quite forthright, shall we say, litigator, and then coming home and being a spiritual being and engaging in consultative processes. So I wanted to find something that meant I could bring my spiritual life and more of the essence of my true personality into my work life. And that's when I discovered mediation, and it was really like a light bulb moment for me. And so ever since then, I have really been helping my clients interact in a much more friendly, a much calmer and a much more supported process of resolving their conflicts through using dialogue and discourse, which effectively is another word for consultation. So hopefully I can bring a little bit of my experience and insights to this discussion today. So that was really just a bit of background. Before we can sort of look at what consultation means from a Baha'i perspective, I think it's really, really important that we understand how the Baha'i administrative sort of function is set out. Because as Baha'is, actually the Baha'i faith as a religion is quite revolutionary, I would say, very, very different in that we don't have a clergy, we don't have an established priesthood. So every adult Baha'i is capable and able to participate in Baha'i administration and Baha'i decision-making process at various levels. And this is because Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, has brought a new process for the world, and one that is aimed at bringing people together and enabling people to think independently and to work together. And therefore there needs to be a process that is much more autonomous and much less authoritarian. So at a local level, we have elected local spiritual assemblies who are elected annually. At a national or regional level, we will have national or regional assemblies, again, elected annually. And again, the Baha'i elections is another whole topic for another modern perspectives, because the process is very, very different to the elections that we're used to seeing in the world, and very much based on virtues-based characteristics, secret ballot, there's no electioneering. And then we have an international governing body, the Universal House of Justice. And that body is elected every 5 years by the various members of the National Spiritual Assembly. In support of the administrative arm, we also have what we call a learned or appointed arm. And these various levels provide, I would say, I suppose, academic or spiritual guidance to the various institutions. So there's a very balanced two-way process in which we have focus on our spiritual principles supported by our learned and appointed arm who work with the communities, help us continue to educate and work together, and together with the administrative arm who help with our practical and logistical arrangements and our logistical day-to-day practicing of the faith in our communities. And in order for this to be able to function appropriately and effectively, and also as a role model for the rest of the world, the fundamental principle of ensuring that discourse and dialogue between all of these different administrative and appointed arms of the faith have an absolutely exceptional system of faultless dialogue, which is our system of consultation. Coupled with that, obviously we have to look at the foundation of our faith, which is this concept that of unity and diversity. And the fundamental principles of our faith: oneness of mankind, we're all part of one human family. All religions come from the same source, God, and have come at different times of mankind's existence to meet the needs of that age. In order for us to live as one human family, we need to eliminate all prejudice. We need to ensure that the extremes of wealth and poverty are abolished, that men and women take the equal roles that they have been given to be able to bring society forward and create this ever-advancing civilization, this sustainable future for mankind and for our planet. And in order to help that, the seeds of knowledge, of harmony, of science, knowledge from science and knowledge from religion sewn together to bring us and guide us and to face the physical and spiritual challenges that mankind face. And in order to be able to do that, we need a universal process of education to ensure that every child has access not just to academic education, but to values-based and ethical education. The universal language would help. We may be a little way away from that, but in the meantime, methodologies of being able to communicate with one another effectively. And with all of this, we believe that universal peace is not only possible, but inevitable. But in order for all of this to be able to function from a practical level, we need to be able to know how to speak to each other, and we need to be able to make that discourse effective. Baha'u'llah says, consultation bestoweth greater awareness and transmuteth conjecture into certitude. It is a shining light which in a dark world leadeth the way and guideth. For everything there is and will continue to be a station of perfection and maturity. The maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. So it's very clear that in order for us to be able to understand one another, to live in a state of unity, to be able to eliminate prejudice, we are going to need a very, very structured and well-guided system of discourse. Now, this moment, I just want to take a little while, I won't dwell on it for too long, but on what we are used to, because I think it's very, very important to ensure that we have this conversation, not at this sort of ephemeral level of the desire to have much better consultation, but we need to have it from a very practical level. And if we're going to be practical about it, we need to accept where we are and what our current knowledge base is. And really, society's current knowledge base is based on what they've seen in Parliament, what they've seen in courts of law. The lawyers, set a precedent on how we discourse, what we see in the media, what is presented by Hollywood in terms of the way disputes and conflict may be resolved, and more recently, how this has played out into social media and the freedom to be able to express opinions and views on a variety of different topics to an entire global audience at the press of a few buttons. Now, Abdu'l-Baha was the son of Baha'u'llah, and he took the role of being what we call the center of our covenant. It was very, very important that after the passing of Baha'u'llah, that the Baha'i faith didn't split or faction into different groups. So Baha'u'llah gave this station of the center of the covenant to Abdu'l-Baha. After a long period of time in prison in the East because Baha'u'llah's faith was opposed and Abdu'l-Baha was in prison with his father. When he was released, Abdu'l-Baha traveled extensively in the West, talking about the faith of Baha'u'llah, and was able to have a number of interactions and experiences whilst on these travels. And whilst researching this, I found this fantastic quote from Abdu'l-Baha, which really speaks to this point. And he says, in France, I was present at a session of the Senate, but the experience was not impressive. Parliamentary procedure should have for its object the attainment of the light of truth upon questions presented, and not furnish a battleground for opposition and self-opinion. Antagonism and contradiction are unfortunate and always destructive to truth. In the parliamentary meeting mentioned, altercation and useless quibbling were frequent. The result, mostly confusion and turmoil. Even in one instance, a physical encounter took place between two members. It was not consultation, but comedy. And I like the light-hearted approach towards the end of saying that it actually became so ineffective, it was a nonsense. And I think we often see that, and we can observe that through media today in seeing sort of parliamentary exchanges. And for me, when I'm working with clients, I need to explain to them why mediation or a dialogue-focused conflict resolution will be far more effective in their situation than the traditional methods of litigation or arguing the matter out in court. And this really, Abdu'l-Baha's experience really speaks to what I have seen as well as a practicing litigator, that tempers can get so raised, people can become so ensconced in the positions that they want to present, that the whole key to the problem is lost. And really it becomes a very divided, competitive experience in which the parties are just presenting their opposing views, trying to assert authority over one another. When I say there's no autonomy, often, certainly in a court situation, a decision is made by a third party, listening to the parties and weighing it out in the balance. And then we have a win-lose situation where we have one victor who comes forward with their result and their outcome, and one person who is lost. Often in a court setting, the loser also foots the bill, so a financial loss as well. But actually, what I began to experience and observe on a regular basis was there was no real win or lose, because more often than not, the matter had become so stressful, caused so much anxiety, destroyed the relationship, that even with an outcome, it wasn't exactly how the protagonist has seen the matter playing out. So this traditional method of discourse, I find, can be actually quite self-destructive by virtue of its very nature. And so I think to understand this, we need to see how traditional methods of dispute resolution can spiral out of control very, very rapidly. I was already observing this with my clients and was just, it was an interest to me. But when I actually started to study dispute resolution from an academic perspective and mediation, the conflict spiral is actually a concept that we teach, because in order to avoid it, we need to be aware it's happening. So what happens, as you can see at the bottom of that spiral, we have the word cooperation, which is probably the only positive word on that spiral. And I don't know if anyone else sees the visual of a hurricane, but the idea that this is a weather system that's building and building and building is quite a visual image of how an argument or a dispute or a difference of opinion can really become quite a storm. So we have our cooperation and the parties are cooperating, but through that cooperation, we suddenly have an element of competition where somebody really would like something to happen their way. And in order to pursue that, they're going to push for that goal. And in pushing for that goal, there starts to be an assumption by the other party that maybe there's some deliberate behaviours that are manipulating a situation or trying to push for that outcome in a sort of around the side way, and trying to achieve it without getting everybody involved or discussing it. And that person might then get defensive. And in their defensiveness, they can then create a response of defensiveness. At this point, if we're starting to have a breakdown of communication or a breakdown of feeling, what people tend to do is look for support. So they'll sort of say, well, you know, don't you think that it would be good this way, to colleagues at work, or trying to pull someone into their side, because we feel so much stronger when we have someone on side. And as we go up and up this spiral, we can see that we make more assumptions. And what tends to happen here is the communication, the actual dialogue breaks down, and much more in terms of assumption or groupthink. Groupthink is something we're seeing more and more. If you see it on social media, it's different factions, so right and left, for example, people associating themselves with a particular way of thought. And this comes from this rising spiral and this breakdown of actually speaking to one another. And so at some point you see where it says beliefs feed observations. What that means is we are no longer actually seeing the reality of what is happening or what it is we need to achieve. We're only being belief-led in our views, our very, very strong views about what it is we want, what outcome we want to achieve. And at that point, I like this, we can actually become quite moralistic. We're right and everybody else is wrong. And as you see, you get further and further up this spiral. We have personalization, people just wanting to hurt one another or score points over another, and ultimately the relationship, the business, the employment relationship, the family relationship. If we don't nip any of these elements in the bud, recognize them and fix them, this is where conflict or difference of opinion can really get out of control and end up in the hands of the lawyers. So in order to be able to avoid it, we really need to understand where we are and what's happening. And it's interesting because in 1949, in a letter from Shoghi Effendi, now Shoghi Effendi was the grandson of Abdul Baha, and when Abdul Baha passed away, he handed over the reins of the faith to Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi gave the Baha'i community a lot of guidance on our administrative and organizational setup really at this time. And in one of his letters to one of the administrative bodies, the National Spirit Assembly of Baha'is of Germany and Austria, in 1949, the Baha'is must learn to forget personalities and overcome the desire, so natural in people, to take sides and fight about it. They must also learn to really make use of the good principle of consultation. And I think it's important that he added so natural in people. We can't help this conflict spiral. It's actually part of our fight or flight animal instinct to protect ourselves. So if we're in some kind of dispute, it'd be very natural for us to go up this spiral if we're not aware we're doing it. So what do? We need to learn the art of consultation. And the good news for everyone, is good news for me as well, is it is no easy skill to learn. So it's something we have to keep practicing. I say it's good news for me because, you know, sometimes we have cases that don't go the way we want to go. And it's a reminder, it's a humbling moment to know that this process, this consultative process, is not an easy skill to learn. Consultation is no easy skill to learn, requiring as it does the subjugation of all egotism and unruly passions, the cultivation of frankness and freedom of thought, as well as courtesy, openness of mind, and wholehearted acquiescence in a majority decision. So really, it's about putting ourselves to one side. And this comes from the Universal House of Justice, who, after the passing of Shoghi Effendi and after a period of the Baha'is arranging their administrative affairs, the Universal House of Justice was formed in line with the desire of Baha'u'llah and the will and testament of Abdul Baha. So following through the very, very clear guidance on how Baha'is should manage themselves. And the Universal House of Justice formed, and they write letters and give guidance to the Baha'i community about how we interact with one another. So in one of their guidance pieces on consultation, they remind us that it isn't easy. And it's something that we have to keep thinking about, and we have to be aware of, and we have to remember which elements of our own personalities we might need to just relax a little bit or think about as we're going into a consultation process. When you learn about mediation, and quick, I'm just looking at my watch because I want to make sure I say everything, but I think I've got time for a quick anecdote. When I walked into my first mediation training course and I'd signed my name as a lawyer from such and such law firm, my mediator facilitator looked me in the eye and said, "I hate training lawyers because I have to reteach you everything and you need to unlearn everything you know." And he's absolutely correct. I'm still in contact with him now. He's my mentor when I have very difficult situations, but he was absolutely correct. The first thing I needed to relearn was to listen. And I think, you know, my family members could probably attest that when I was in the heart of my litigation sort of business, my litigation world, I probably wasn't the most empathetic or compassionate listener. And I was probably, you know, halfway up that spiral in most conversations, just by nature of the work that I did that I couldn't really leave at home. So I had to learn to re-listen. And active listening, if anyone who works in the field of counselling or therapy will also be familiar with this expression. It's about listening to hear. It's amazing how many of us don't listen to hear. Again, very natural. We're listening to be able to prepare our response. We're listening to be able to acknowledge or say something that will support what it is we want. So in active listening, we stop that. We listen with purity of motive and intention to really hear what the speaker wants to tell us. The next step of the mediation process, and by the way, this is normally like a whole morning's training, and I'm like putting it into one slide. So if anyone's got any questions about this at the end, please ask. The next thing that we do is we have to reframe. The reason for the reframe, and this is a real learned skill from the mediator, and you really do learn it on the job and continue to learn it, is taking very, very aggressive, angry statements, hurt statements, and framing them into a context that will enable them to be much easier on the ear for the parties and enabling them to guide the parties. So that's normally the job of a mediator, but somebody who has quite high emotional intelligence will naturally think about what it is they're saying and will naturally frame something in a way that makes it easier for the person to hear. So this is a neutral communication. I've put here, use I messages. What I mean by that is often we will, when we're in a discussion, say you do this, or you have said this, or you're going to do that, anything that begins with you. And that enables someone to say, no, I didn't, and create a bit of a comedy back and forth, pantomime, oh, yes, you did, oh, no, you didn't. And we want to avoid that. So if you say, I feel that you are trying to, or no, I feel that, or I have heard it this way, and you're putting it more on you, you're talking about it from a personal reference. I can see that you have found this situation difficult. It's already very soothing, and mediators use that a lot. And part of what we do as mediators is influence the dialogue. And so you'll then start to find people who will say, I felt. They might start to say, you did this, and then they'll stop and say, oh no, I felt that that was what you were trying to achieve. And the person can then say, well, yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. And it's a much easier way of taking the conversation forward. Recognizing emotion, just heard me say it, I can see that you're angry by this, is really, really important. We address the elephant in the room. If someone's angry, let's figure out why they're angry. And the best way is to label that emotion and say, I can see that you're angry. I can acknowledge that this situation is making you angry. We're not necessarily agreeing that they're entitled to be angry. We're just acknowledging that that is the emotion at the time. It's amazing how soothing and healing that can be to somebody to hear the emotion they're feeling being acknowledged and recognized, and not diminished or dismissed or being told that it's a wrong emotion to be feeling. The next most important thing that we have to do is depersonalize the issue. So often issues become very heavily personalized. And even when we're consulting, even when we're talking, we'll say, well, you know, you only want this because you want it for your purposes, or this suits you, or whatever it is. And that's depersonalizing it. We really have to focus on actually what the issue is that we need to resolve. And I'm going to show you later on some ways of achieving that, and some key questions that we can always keep in our mind when we're consulting, to avoid this bringing of personalities in. Because if we personalize, then we're going to pretty much get ourselves up that spiral pretty quickly. As soon as we've had this process of listening and agreeing and determining what the issues are that we need to discuss, we create an environment of brainstorming. Now, those from Baha'i backgrounds who have participated in the consultation process, this is probably the closest to what we see in our administrative process, where we have this concept of an idea is not our idea. We put an idea out there and it no longer belongs to us, it belongs to the group. And this is what we bring into mediation as well. Put the idea down. There's no such thing as a bad idea at this point. We're not going to do any of it. We're just going to listen to what everyone thinks and file it all down. And then, very, very important, we use the objective criteria. What this means is, in a Baha'i context, we might go to the Baha'i writings. What do the writings say? What's our guidance from the Universal House of Justice maybe say? What do our counsellors think? What does the administrative arm, the learned arm advise us to do? So we go to an objective criteria. Outside of the Baha'i community, this would be, what does the law say? Are there any, if we're in an employment context, what do we normally do? Do you have a staff handbook? All of these elements where we're taking it out of the reign of the parties and their decision about what they think needs to happen, and say, well, what would normally happen? And this comes in a very, very clear order. You don't ask that question at the outset. Why don't you ask that question at the outset? Because we're not ready to hear that question at the outset. We haven't listened, we haven't reframed, we haven't identified our issues. So you can see there's a very, very clear order. And once we start to use the objective criteria, we start to agree on a framework, we then have to reflect on what the outcome or no outcome might look like and review. And then we just come up with an idea, we put that idea into practice, and we review the solution. So that is a mediation process in a nutshell. And it is also a foundation of a good consultative experience. We then also have to remember our own ethical characteristics that we bring to the table. So I'm conscious of the time. I'm just going to play a quick game with all of you, just to kind of wake you all up. There are 3 quotes. And just to explain to those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with what we mean by virtues, these are just characteristics, ethical characteristics that we may present as humans, such as generosity or forgiveness or understanding, compassion. These are different sort of virtues. So as I read these 3 quotes, there's 2 on this page and 1 on the next, I'd like you to be thinking, and maybe you can type in the chat, I might not be able to see it, but think about the virtues that are presented through these 3 quotes, because these are all virtues that we would bring into the consultation process. And then maybe right at the end, we can look and see what everybody put. Consort with all men, O people of Baha, in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. If ye be aware of a certain truth, if ye possess a jewel of which others are deprived, share it with them in a language of utmost kindliness and goodwill. If it be accepted, if it fulfill its purpose, your object is attained. If anyone should refuse it, leave him unto himself and beseech God to guide him. Beware lest ye deal unkindly with him. A kindly tongue is the lodestone of the hearts of men. It is the bread of the spirit, it clotheth the words with meaning. It is the fountain of the light of wisdom and understanding. Baha'u'llah. He must never seek to exalt himself above anyone, must wash away from the tablet of his heart every trace of pride and vainglory, must cling unto patience and resignation, observe silence and refrain from idle talk. For the tongue is a smouldering fire, and excess of speech a deadly poison. Material fire consumeth the body, whereas the fire of the tongue devoureth both heart and soul. The force of the former lasteth but for a time, whilst the effects of the latter endure a century. And the last quote, which was already read to us, but it would be good for us to revisit. Consultation must have for its object the investigation of truth. He who expresses an opinion should not voice it as correct and right, but set it forth as a contribution to the consensus of opinion. For the light of reality becomes apparent when two opinions coincide. A spark is produced when flint and steel come together. Man should weigh his opinions with the utmost sincerity, serenity, calmness, and composure. Before expressing his own views, he should carefully consider the views already advanced by others. If he finds that a previously expressed opinion is more true and worthy, he should accept it immediately and not willfully hold to an opinion of his own. By this excellent method, he endeavors to arrive at unity and truth. Opposition and division are deplorable. Therefore, true consultation is spiritual conference in the attitude and atmosphere of love. Members must love each other in the spirit of fellowship in order that good results may be forthcoming. Love and fellowship are the foundation. I'm going to show you this lovely slide. It's so colourful. And I think it's really worth, when we're in consultation, to have something like this available, just to remind us of what we can bring to the table in terms of love. I like curiosity, that helps us with our active listening. Open-mindedness, really, really important when I'm training people on this. So you need to keep an open mind. Kindness, absolutely, so important to be kind. Hope, positivity. I'm always, people always tell me I'm so optimistic, but I've seen so many positive resolutions, I can afford to be optimistic. Fairness as well. And I like the one there that says humour, because humour is also important, keeping a sense of humour. And what I always say is I can tell when we're about to resolve something because people start cracking jokes or laughing at my bad ones. Okay, I've got about 5 minutes so before I wrap up. So I just want to, these are a couple of slides that I use in my mediation training. And it's a little concept about, it's called the mediator's apple. And what we say is, normally, if you were to have a situation where you had two people that want the same apple and they're arguing about the apple, they will put their positions forward. So you've got one apple, two people, and one person will say, you know, I need that apple. And the other person says, I asked first. And the other person says, well, I need it more than you. I have more of a need. I'm hungrier than you. And, you know, you have this back and forth. And so what does the person do? And the normal response that you would get is divide the apple in two and give everybody half an apple each. And as mediators, we say, so you have two people going away with half an apple, half happy, because both of them wanted the whole apple. What we as mediators do is we do a step back. We're a problem-solving approach. So we ask them, what exactly is it you would like to do with the apple? Now, you look, 99.9 times out of 100, somebody's going to say, I want to eat the apple. And then, you know, you've got the whole thing about dividing it again. But often you'll have somebody say, well, I just want the skin, or I want the seed, or I want to do apple painting. There's a whole range of different responses you can get if you start to find out what the person's need is, rather than their position, their statement. And that is what we're looking at. We're looking at addressing a need. And the only way we can get to addressing that need is to have a bit more of a conversation around the issue through this consultation. And we're looking forward. We're forward facing. How are we going to positively solve this issue? and using our brainstorming. So that's one thing that we as mediators use a lot. We don't just listen to the demands, we ask the parties to consider the needs. And then this is something that I found this cartoon and I thought it was just so good. I hope everyone can see this clearly on their screens. But what we have here is we have a little boy. He's playing, he's got his space helmet on, he fires his rocket and his goldfish, smashes, and there's glass and fish and water and stuff all over the carpet. And he's a very innovative little boy, and he solves the problem himself by using his own little helmet as the goldfish bowl. And I think it's a really good, for those of us as parents, if our child smashes a goldfish bowl, our first reaction is fury. What were you doing? What were you thinking? You mustn't play, I've always told you, and a real anger response. And really what we need to do when we have a crisis situation, and I'm not just talking about kids and broken goldfish bowls here, I'm talking about a very, very urgent crisis situation, is not to go to that, not to go to how did this happen, why did this happen, who's responsible. It's not helpful, it's not useful. We have to address what is the actual problem. The problem is that the goldfish bowl is smashed on the floor. What is most urgently required? A home for the goldfish. How do we solve it? Well, the kid was pretty innovative and got his hat. Who's best placed to solve it? Whoever's there. Is our solution workable? It is for now. Is it permanent? Probably not. If not, what is the permanent solution? Is there any need for blame allocation? And how can we avoid this problem in the future? And what have we learned? And this is how we have to break down our consultation. This is how we have to look at it. What is our problem? What do we need to require? How are we working together to solve it? What capacity do we have to solve our issues? Who's best placed to help with what? Have we come up with a workable solution? Can we go back if we haven't? Is it a short-term solution? Is it permanent? These are all the sorts of questions. So actually consultation isn't necessarily always a answer, somebody giving the answers. It's asking lots of the most pertinent and correct questions. And where can it be used? It can be used everywhere. It should be used everywhere. So actually what I tend to find is when I work with people in a professional context, in commercial or workplace mediations, it's a light bulb moment for them, and they come and later tell me they tried it with their kids or they tried it with their husbands and wives and found it absolutely wonderful, and they're really enjoying using this process. So definitely I think the best place to practice consultation is at home. First place, always use consultative methodologies in the home, and teach our children to learn to consult, to learn to put their ideas forward, to be accepting when a group decision is not necessarily the one that they want, and understand the reasons why. Certainly feel that consultation should be utilised in educational establishments, and children should be encouraged through their education to learn to discourse effectively. Really useful in our neighbourhoods, really, really useful to be able to help to keep unity within the places that we live. And part of my job is helping people to use this system in the workplace. And the benefits are we end up with peaceful decision making, we can teach positive behaviours, positive relationships are retained. That is so important, especially again in the workplace or the family, that we don't have ill feeling, we don't have breakdowns of those relationships. It can actually improve our relationships, our dynamics and our interactions, because we have far fewer sort of adversarial or fear-based dynamics, and we have much more open and creative and enjoyable exchanges. And of course this brings about unity and this point of the outcome belonging to all. We're very convinced now through lots of research that when people come to a decision themselves, they're much more likely to stick to it, follow it through and take ownership of it. So again, that's quite important in a children context, to give them responsibility for making positive decisions and then sticking to them. So just in conclusion, 2 quotes to finish. Our Baha'i vision for consultation. Again, 1 quote from Abdu'l-Baha and then a quote to finish from Baha'u'llah, and then I'll open it up to some questions. If 5 people meet together to seek for truth, they must begin by cutting themselves free from all their own special conditions and renouncing all preconceived ideas. In order to find truth, we must give up our prejudices, our own small trivial notions. An open, receptive mind is essential. If our chalice is full of self, there is no room in it for the water of life. The fact that we imagine ourselves to be right and everybody else wrong is the greatest of all obstacles in the path towards unity. And unity is necessary if we would reach truth, for truth is one. And from Baha'u'llah to finish, the utterance of God is a lamp whose light is these words: ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch. Deal ye with one with another with the utmost love and harmony, with friendliness and fellowship. He who is the day star of truth beareth me witness. So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. The one true God, he who knoweth all things himself testifieth to the truth of these words. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was really interesting, both as myself as a lawyer, a lot of these things I see myself, and also we all can put these principles into practice. So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead right now and put it in the chat. So our first question is, can you talk more about consultation in family settings? Let's say, for example, spouses disagree about parenting styles and each feels strongly that their way is the right way. How do they start doing Baha'i consultation?
Oh, really, really good question. And I always get really nervous about answering questions about parenting and family life because I'm kind of in it. So this is just from my own experience. And the first thing to say, there's so many things in the chat there, but I can't see who's asked this question. But the first thing to say that trial and error and acceptance is really, really important, I think, in a relationship setting, in terms of knowing that we're in it for the long haul. And so we've got to figure out what works for us from our own familial setting. But actually, what I would strongly recommend in terms of introducing a consultative method is, again, to use this process of, if you've listened to the quotes and what we've been saying, is that question looks at two very different different views, not necessarily opposing, but different views on parenting and how to raise the children. And what we're advising in a mediation setting is to bring into place this process every single time. So literally, for every single decision that needs to be made, it's a process of listening to each other about each other's views and why those views are held and what the concerns are, and allowing each party that space to be able to lay those views out. It's really important to then bring in our virtues list, which works quite handy to have something like that on the fridge. And remember to empathize. To when you're listening to the other person, instead of thinking, this is why I was talking about how important it is to understand how we actively listen, and why the Universal House of Justice say this is hard, this is a skill, it's a bit like training, it's like a muscle memory, to hold back on any desire to criticize at that point or any desire to interject. What I do, I don't advertise that I work with couples because it's a very, very different, it's not a different skill, but it's just not something that I want to put a lot of my time and energy into. I do a lot of employment work, but occasionally I will get asked on a personal basis, and then I will help people if I feel that they are open and amenable to trying the mediation process with their marriage. And what I do with them, and I think this could work in a home setting as well, is I ask them each to have a piece of paper in front of them and a pen, and to write down their interjections or their thoughts rather than say them. So to allow the person the space to be able to say what it is they are wanting to say and why they're saying it. So like mobile phones, let's pick mobile phones. Should our child have a mobile phone? I feel really strongly they shouldn't. I feel really strongly that they'll be left out if they don't. Real hot potato of a parenting issue, and both parents may have completely different experiences and reasons. So this is not a conversation to have whilst peeling potatoes, right? This is not a conversation to have at the end of the day when you're tired. This is an important familial consultative conversation. So we set aside the time to have that conversation. We create an environment, we make a cup of tea, we sit at a table and we say, we need to have this decision. We need to, as parents, collectively decide how it is we are going to approach this. And I'm going to listen to you and you're going to listen to me. And we're going to write down our various interjections and our thoughts rather than interject. Then we get to the point of what I said, the reframe and the reflect, the acceptance. I can see you're frightened. I can see and understand that you're frightened. Let's identify Someone's put in the group that needs are really important. Let's identify the needs here. Is the need to protect the child from the big bad outside world? How do we address that? Is the need to something that that you feel reflects badly on yourself as a parent? Let's address that. All the different sort of needs, and let's put those down. Then we're going to brainstorm our solutions. We've got to come up with something. Otherwise, we're going to just keep having the same arguments. So what's going to happen if we don't solve this? We're going to have a tension with our child. We're going to have arguments amongst ourselves. So we have a duty and a responsibility to resolve this. So let's brainstorm some ideas. Let's look at what works. In that situation, for example, with the mobile phone, a child might be old enough to also be able to present and participate in that brainstorm session. I think it's really good, really from an early age. I mean, let's make sure we don't have, you say to a kid, let's consult about where we're going to go on holiday. They're all going to say Disneyland, and that might not happen. So, but let's teach our children to participate in this. Let's set an example. So there is no need, there really is, I would say this, Michael, there's no need to throw shoes at each other. There really isn't a need to. We may feel like you really want to, but there is no need. Take the structure, understand the structure. We structure so many things in our life, right? I'm sorry, there must be other questions, but I'm going to say this. We structure so much in our life. Our whole day is a structure. We set an alarm, we get up, we have our hygiene structure in terms of when we shower, we brush our teeth. We have a structure in how we get to work. When we're at work, we structure how we prepare meals. We structure so much. As humans, it's inbuilt in us to provide structure. It's quite eye-opening for me how few people structure their conversations, how few people think about what it is that they need to say, how they need to say it, how it will be best received. And in a familial setting, in a matrimonial setting, your spouse, what their triggers are, how best, and I get told this by my husband, how to catch them at their best. When are we going to catch them at their best, and how are we going to make this conversation a really good, positive conversation? So those are some of my ideas. And yes, the answer to the question is, have I tried this in my own family? Yes. Has it worked? Most of the time. Okay.
Thank you. The next question is, would you please elaborate on how preserving unity fits into the Baha'i perspective in contrast to the traditional processes?
Can I elaborate on how preserving unity fits into the Baha'i perspective as opposed to in the a really good question. Well, obviously, as I was saying, the foundation for the entire foundation of Baha'i faith is to establish unity, to ensure that humanity is able to learn to work together. And I think this is actually the foundation of religion. We, as people who believe in a loving God who wants to guide his family to have an everlasting, to continue to have an everlasting civilization, that foundation stone of unity is so important. We take that into, when we're talking about the traditional method, unity is not, it doesn't even come onto the radar. I hope I'm answering this question as the person wants me to answer it. It doesn't even come into the radar. It's not a concept. And again, I find this in when I go into workplaces. It's so important in a workplace. It's so important in governance, in local governance. It's so important that the political parties that are representing the people are united. They don't realize that, but it's so important for them to be united. They have a function to serve. In a workplace, I find that if I have a team and certain members that are broken down, it's impacting the rest of the team. Their lack of unity, their difference of opinion, their views about each other's inability to do a particular job is not just impacting them, it's impacting their colleagues, it's impacting the productivity of their team, and it's therefore impacting the business as a whole. So whereas Baha'is, we put unity at the heart of it, I tend to find, and again in litigation, unity is just taken out of the picture. It's not even on the radar. Interestingly enough, I personally, because I'm Baha'i, I've always thought unity is a very Baha'i word. So I'm always surprised when I hear someone mention the word unity in a professional context. But I was recently working with a big organization who called me in to help two very key senior people who just couldn't see eye to eye. And the CEO said to me, what is the most important need we have here? It's regaining our unity. And honestly, I did take a double take, so I'm so Baha'i. But it was very important. It was important to them from a commercial aspect. They were realizing, it was dawning on them that if they didn't have a united senior team, it was really impacting people leaving, it was impacting client relationships, all sorts of things. So I think, you know, speaking to this question, outside of the Baha'i faith, there hasn't been, it's kind of been off people's radars, this sense that unity is so important to how we operate and how we interact and correlate. And I'm hoping, I took the slide out because I had too much to say, but there was a slide about how this is infiltrating, this idea is coming into commercial settings. And I also think it's coming into people's psyche, that actually establishing unity and looking at how political parties interact or how governments interact in this very theatrical, dramatic way of just hating each other for the sake of hating each other because they represent opposite sides. And actually, if we're looking at the fact that they're trying to help govern a nation, there needs to be a foundation of unity and understanding between them. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. The next question is, how can we use consultation to deal with racial justice, which is the most vital and challenging issue?
Oh, yeah, really good question. And I think I mean, racial injustice is absolutely so important. I think especially in the States where it's such a prevalent issue. And again, I think from a Baha'i perspective and also from a mediator perspective, discourse and exchange of experiences. The reason that something like racial prejudice or equality of men and women becomes such a hot potato is because if you think of my conflict spiral slide that I showed you, we've got to the stereotypical assumption making stage of that discourse. And we need to bring it back down to the listening, back down to the exchange of experiences and enabling a forum in which true experience can be shared, heard correctly. And again, it's not an adversarial issue. Prejudice is it's not a right or wrong. It's not an adversarial issue. It's I am experiencing prejudice. I am being prejudiced in my life. I'm experiencing discrimination. Hear my story, understand how it impacts me, understand how that impacts society. And I'm not asking for someone to say, no, you're wrong, it doesn't. I'm asking for someone to say, gosh, you've raised a fair point. Let's look at how we can address that. So yeah, funnily enough, I would say the answer to that is systematic approaches to enabling and opening up discourse in a way that doesn't follow the traditional mold of, is this a debate? It is not a debate. It is a experience of groups of people. In English law, we call it with protected characteristics, who need to be able to put their experiences forward. You said in your introduction about the work that I do with women. Again, the solution to the misrepresentation of women in the workplace is for women to share their experiences, to demonstrate how they can facilitate and help and what they have to offer. And the only way in which that can be really allowed is to allow that discourse and that voice to be heard without it being censored in any way.
Thank you. What is the psychological or emotional effect of broken trust in a consultation situation, and how might it be restored?
Oh, I'm so glad someone asked this, because I was thinking about some, people might ask about what do you do in the situation where someone's not really telling the truth, or in this element of broken trust. And so broken trust, again, if you look at the spiral, let's take broken trust as being a natural consequence of bad communication that's gone off track. So we accept that trust in that situation will be broken. A lot of what we do is accepting. And again, we need to look at the root of why and the cause of why the trust has been broken. So initially we need to ask the person who's now feeling mistrustful what it is that's caused them to feel, what they've heard, what's being said. And then we need to understand why the person who has broken the trust may have said or behaved in the way they've done. So again, it's very natural, normal for us to say someone behaved like this and I don't trust them anymore. And so now we have to just go from there. We have to just deal with that situation. As mediators, we don't. We go back to, as I say, I'm very optimistic. I'm looking to rebuild trust. And in order to rebuild that trust, Because, well, the question is, what is the effect? The effect is if we have broken trust, that consultation has broken down, because we need to be able to trust one another. But doesn't mean it's broken down irretrievably. We have to accept and acknowledge that the trust has been broken. Let's remember our smashed goldfish bowl. Let's not blame or accuse or why did you break the trust? We have to look at how we can create an environment in which trust can be rebuilt, in which the person who may not be being truthful or may not be behaving honest feels safe, and they feel able to now start to behave in a more truthful or trustworthy or appropriate manner. So many mediations that are based on a break of trust, some really, really quite devastating actions by people, which has broken trust. And if we focus on the impact, the hurt, the harm, the behaviors, then we're probably going to struggle to resolve that situation. So if we want to rebuild that trust, if we want that relationship to carry on working, we need to look at creating an environment in which we can discourse through. And this is where I talk about addressing the elephant in the room. We sometimes have to address something that may be a difficult thing to address, because otherwise we're talking around an issue. And that certainly comes when we've had a breakdown in trust.
Thank you. This question is, how can we practice consultation with narcissists?
So there's a whole section in my mediation training about the various sort of psychological characteristics of people. And actually this was tying, I was thinking about this. This is really good. The questions are flowing really nicely. And just look, I will just say, these are all just my opinions, by the way. This is not, I am not representing the Baha'i faith in any way, shape or form in the answers to these specific questions. These are just my opinions based on my own experience. But mediation or conflict resolution methodologies based on discourse and based on mutual discourse only work where the participants want to participate and understand the principles. So we set out the principles, and the majority of times, I've got to say, I've worked with all sorts of different people. I always, not always, but most of the time when the people come to meet me, one of them will say, because we meet individually first, one of them will say, oh, they're just so wrapped up in themselves. There's just no way they're going to, go along with this. I love this process, but there's just no way they're going to go. Often both of them say that to me. And I'm like, the optimist in me is like, let's give this a go. Let's try. And if it doesn't, if we really feel that it's not working, I call time on it. It's not about forcing people down a route. So if you have someone, again, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a specialist in psychological conditions, but if you have someone, and we've got to be really careful about labelling people as well, so if you have, a professional diagnosis, fair enough, but we've got to be very careful about assuming. So what I just go on is, are you here to work with us? Are you here? And if we think back to some of the quotes, are you going to leave ego at the door? Are you going to listen? Are you going to accept and be convinced and persuaded because the other person is bearing their soul? And do we want to come to a mutual agreement? And do we want to come to an amicable and mutual solution? And really, quite frankly, if there's a party that's just not towing the line and not wanting to participate in that way, then that consultation process with them is not necessarily going to work. In outside circles, there are other places that we can go for that. The court still exists for parties to have a third party determination. There's counselling, and we as mediators will direct people. But I'm actually quite firm. I've become very firm. When I was earlier in it, I try and give everyone the benefit of doubt, and I saw it as a personal failing if I couldn't get people past, to an agreement. And now I don't, and I'm really firm. And actually, I will often say, I think we've taken this as far as we can go, and I think I'm going to offer you some other options. And sometimes that will be oh no, we'll give it another try, we'll come back. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, we accept that this isn't for us, which is fine. It's just a methodology. In a Baha'i concept, if you have, I would, the answer, the Baha'i answer, go to the writings. Go to the writings and remind our group that we are consulting. These are our directions. We leave the ego at home. We have to listen to everybody's different views, and we kindly go to the writings. Additionally, within the Baha'i administration, we have the the learned arm to call upon. If we're having difficult consultations and we need some support, then we can consult with our learned arm as well, our assistants, our board members, or we can consult with our National Spirit Assembly. So hopefully that's answered from both sides.
Looks like we don't have any more questions, but do you have any final thoughts or something you didn't have time to say or anything?
Oh, probably. I could talk about this all day, really. It's difficult when you're in this. Normally, I have it as a bit of a back and forth when I'm training. So it's difficult when I'm talking to a computer screen. But I think I've said a lot. I think there's a huge amount to take in. I think my final thought would be, there is, I think, definitely anyone who's really felt interested in this, there's a lot of information, not just on the Baha'i consultation process online, but also on how mediation processes work and this balance. And I think the other thing that I probably didn't say was, this is really about a balance between our intellectual capacities and our emotional capacities. And I personally feel that the way education's going, the way commercialism's going, there's so much emphasis on IQ. And I think there needs to be so much more emphasis on our emotional quotient, our EQ, and our ability to be empathetic and bring these virtues. And I think the more that we see people implementing these virtues into their daily lives, and in implementing this structure and this approach, I think for me personally, it just makes life nicer. It just makes life easier, just have less rows with people, and that's always good.
Great, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this talk. I'm sure everyone else did as well, and we learned so much. So thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
So our speaker next week will be Dr. Roya Akhavan, and her topic will be the historical significance of Tahrir. So these talks again are at every Saturday at noon Eastern Daylight Time. So please invite your friends and family. And if you're not already on our mailing list, I'll put the link to our contact form in the chat again. And we will end today with another Baha'i song.
We are the people of Baha. We are the people of Baha. We are the people of, we are the people of, we are the people of Baha. Ya Baha'u'llah Baha. Ya Baha'u'llah Baha. We are the people of, we are the people of, we are the people of Baha. Firmly we walk the path of God. Firmly we walk the path of God. Until the very last we will be steadfast. Firmly we walk the path of God. We are the people of Baha. We are the people of Baha. We are the people of, we are the people of, we are the people of Baha. We are the people of, we are the people of, we are the people of Baha.
Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next Saturday. Bye.